Recently, someone who likes solar panels and technology asked me a question that made me think. Why don't we cover the entire Caatinga region of Brazil with solar panels to finally eliminate the red flags on electricity bills? So today, let's get into the details about this question. Let's talk more about engineering. Imagine the following scenario where Brazil could solve its energy problems simply by covering the Caatinga with solar panels. Sounds interesting, right? The region receives one of the highest amounts of solar radiation in the world, even higher than many areas of the Sahara Desert. So, why not turn this potential into enough energy to avoid the red flag periods, when thermoelectric plants are activated and electricity bills skyrocket? That's what we're going to find out today, understanding not only the technical feasibility, but also the physical, economic, and even environmental limits of this proposal. The first question that comes up is how much energy do we really need to avoid activating the thermoelectric plants in Brazil? The red flag appears when the reservoir levels drop and the national electric system operator activates the higher-cost thermal power plants for energy security. In critical years, these thermal plants can generate between 10% and 20% of the country's monthly energy. To understand the scale of this, consider that the average Brazilian load is around 70 to 80 gigawatts. In scenarios of water stress, the thermal plants reach between 8 and 16 average gigawatts for long periods. In other words, replacing thermal energy would require filling a gap that could exceed the combined output of the largest Brazilian hydroelectric plants. This raises the question, is it possible to generate all this energy using only solar panels in the Caatinga? Before making any estimates, it's necessary to understand the region's actual solar potential. The Caatinga is one of the areas with the highest global horizontal solar irradiation on the planet, reaching averages between 5.5 and 6.5 kilowatt per square meter per day. This is higher than most of Europe, where solar energy is already widely implemented. But the most important factor is not the amount of sunlight, but rather the actual performance of the plants installed there. In Brazil, solar plants in the semi-arid region have typical capacity factors between 20% and 24%, which is excellent. With that, we can calculate a technical estimate to generate 10 average gigawatts, which is a typical value, to replace thermal power plants during red flag periods. About 50 gigawatts of installed photovoltaic capacity would be needed, considering a capacity factor of 20%. But this estimate brings up another question. How much space would be needed to install something like this in the Caatinga? Utility-scale solar plants usually require between 3 to 10 hectares per installed megawatt, depending on module spacing, topography, required tilt, and support infrastructure. Considering an average value of 12 hectares per megawatt, installing 50 gigawatts would require approximately 600,000 hectares or about 6,000 square kilometers. In relative terms, this would represent less than 1% of the total area of the Caatinga, which makes the project theoretically possible. But then, why don't we do this? Why don't we even cover 1% of the biome? If this would prevent red flags, the answer is that the area is not the problem, it's everything else. The first big obstacle is transmission. The Caatinga is mostly located in northeastern Brazil, and the northeast is already a major exporter of renewable energy to the southeast, through high-voltage direct current transmission lines. But these lines have physical limits, and they were designed for flows of just a few gigawatts, not tens, to transport the average 10 gigawatts needed. To replace the thermal power plants, it would be necessary to build multiple additional long-distance transmission corridors, each one costing billions of reais and requiring licensing, expropriation, and construction work that often takes almost a decade. So, the technical question is inevitable. Is it worth generating energy far from where it's needed if we'll have to spend more to transport it? But even if we solve the transmission issue, another problem arises. Solar energy isn't constant. Unlike thermal plants, it doesn't provide what we call firm power, which is the kind that's always available. At night, during heavy cloud cover or dust storms, generation drops to almost zero. This means that replacing thermal plants with solar requires installing massive storage systems. Brazil does have the technology for this, but the cost is still prohibitive on a large scale. Conservatively, a system capable of compensating for a daily variation of 10 average gigawatts would require batteries with a capacity greater than 20 gigawatt hours. Considering the day-night cycle, the cost of something like this would exceed hundreds of billions of reais. And this leads to another fundamental question. Is it worth investing in giant batteries when the country already has one of the largest natural batteries in the world? That is, its hydroelectric reservoirs? Brazilian hydroelectric plants are, in practice, storage systems that stabilize solar and wind energy. That's why Brazil doesn't necessarily need batteries to integrate renewables, but it still needs to avoid the depletion of its reservoirs. This is precisely the reason for the red flag. When the reservoirs get low, there's no way to guarantee firm power without the thermal plants. So it's not just the average energy that matters, but also the firm energy. The Caatinga can provide a lot of average energy, but it can't guarantee constant power during water crises. This leads us to reflect, is solar energy alone really the solution to reduce red flags? If we analyze it coldly, the answer is no. But that doesn't mean Brazil can't become a leader in solar energy in Latin America, quite the opposite. Today, the country is already one of the regional leaders in annual photovoltaic energy installations, both in centralized plants and in distributed generation. The abundance of sunlight in the northeast and the availability of degraded land make Brazil a natural candidate for energy leadership. With the planned expansion of new transmission lines, the country can become an export hub for its neighbors such as Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and eventually even Chile. But here another challenge arises: how to export this energy? If the interconnection infrastructure between countries is practically non-existent, Latin America does not have an integrated continental grid like Europe. Each country operates its own system, with few connections that cross the borders. Exporting Brazilian energy would require building an international grid, with complex political agreements and extremely expensive infrastructure. In addition, it would be necessary to ensure voltage and frequency stability between the electrical systems of different countries. To make matters worse, neighboring countries are also investing in local renewables, reducing the incentive to import Brazilian energy. That's why, even if Brazil had abundant and cheap solar energy, the logistical and political difficulties of exporting it would be enormous. But, going back to the Caatinga, there's still the environmental issue. Even though the area needed to install dozens of gigawatts of solar power is small compared to the total biome. Although the Caatinga is fragile and home to endemic species adapted to specific water and temperature cycles, large solar plants change the local microclimate, modify the amount of sunlight reaching the ground, affect animal behavior, and require constant maintenance, especially with cleaning the panels. In semi-arid regions, dust can reduce the efficiency of solar modules by up to 30% if regular cleaning is not done. And water is precisely the scarcest resource in the Caatinga. This raises a final question. Is it worth taking environmental risks when there are more balanced alternatives? Brazil doesn't need to turn the Caatinga into a gigantic solar power plant. The country needs to expand the diversification of renewable sources, strengthen interconnections between regions, improve hydrological planning, and expand flexibility technologies, distributed storage, and modernization of existing hydroelectric plants. The Caatinga plays a central role in this, but as part of a smarter and more decentralized system, not as a single massive solution. In the end, the question isn't why we don't cover the Caatinga with solar panels. The real question is how to harness Brazil's enormous solar potential in a technical, economical, and environmentally sustainable way without creating new problems while solving the old ones. If you've made it this far and enjoyed the video, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already, leave your like, and turn on the notification bell. And if you find our content interesting, consider becoming a member to help us keep producing content here on the platform and to be mentioned in our videos. And if you're curious about the courses we recommend, scan the QR code here on the side or check the link in the video description to gain access to various opportunities to develop several skills that will make a difference in your career. And did you also think about the possibility of covering large areas of the semi-arid region with solar panels? Do you have another suggestion for solving the energy problem in Brazil? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your opinion. On the side, you'll find 2 interesting videos to expand your knowledge and satisfy your curiosity. And if you want to support us, just leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell, and consider becoming a channel member. That's it. Engineering lovers, a big hug, and I'll see you in the next video.